Marcus Morrow had never intended to spend the last of his days in isolation, yet there he was, on a planet so remote that most maps did not even mark its existence. The sky above was an ashen gray, though, at certain hours, pale sunlight would pierce through the thick clouds, casting elongated shadows across the jagged landscape. It was a wasteland of black rock, dull red sand, and twisted metal debris left behind by some ancient cataclysm, the nature of which no one could quite recall. Occasionally, a dust storm would sweep across the plains, rattling the walls of Marcus's humble shelter, reminding him that he was not entirely immune to the forces of this barren land. Marcus was an ex-soldier, once part of the elite reconnaissance forces of the Terran Defense Corps. He had seen wars waged across dozens of star systems, witnessed victories that never quite felt like triumphs, and endured defeats that had stolen friends from his side. Over time, he had grown weary of conflict. The far corners of the galaxy had called to him, promising seclusion and an escape from a life that had become too heavy to bear. He found solace, oddly enough, in the notion that perhaps no one else would want to settle on this forsaken planet. It was a place to reflect, to bury his regrets beneath the shifting sands, and to salvage scraps of technology from the junk-strewn deserts, cobbling together a meager existence. His days were simple, mostly spent tinkering with old transmitters, repairing advanced filtration systems, or harvesting the sparse vegetation that managed to cling to life near the edges of a stunted forest. That was, until the night he found the escape pod. The evening had come, bringing a biting chill in the air. Marcus was outside, checking the perimeter sensors, when a sudden flash of light cut across the sky. It was fleeting, little more than a silvery streak that vanished into the horizon. Yet, to his practiced eye, it was unmistakable. A ship, or at least a piece of one, had breached the atmosphere. Starlit nights on this planet were a rarity, but that night, the heavens had parted just enough to reveal the glitter of distant constellations. Against that backdrop, the falling craft glimmered with eerie brilliance. Marcus hesitated only briefly. His heart hammered in his chest, and he felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins, an echo of a time when he had lived for the hunt, the mission, the unrelenting call of duty. He hopped onto his rusted hoverbike, an old military model he had salvaged years ago, and sped across the rocky terrain. The engine's hum broke the otherwise profound silence of the desert, while the headlights cut a narrow path through the swirling dust. As he neared the crash site, the stench of scorched metal and ozone filled the air. The escape pod had half buried itself in the ground, trails of melted sand fused into glass radiating outward from the impact point. Marcus dismounted cautiously, scanning the area for signs of life or danger. He approached the pod's hatch, which was crumpled like a crushed can, and with a few forceful tugs, managed to pry it open. Inside, illuminated by flickering emergency lights, he beheld a figure. She lay slumped against the console, her emerald skin shimmering in the faint glow, her golden eyes shut as though in deep slumber. She was tall but slight of build, with an otherworldly grace even in her current state. Blood seeped from a gash on her forehead, dark crimson against her luminous complexion. Marcus felt a twinge of pity, or perhaps responsibility. He had seen countless wounded in his military days, but never had he stumbled upon a being quite like this. Her attire bore strange insignias, and the style of her clothing suggested origins far from the Terran systems. Without a moment's hesitation, he gingerly lifted her out of the pod. She was light in his arms, surprisingly so. Her features, though alien, carried a haunting beauty that made Marcus's pulse quicken in surprise. He placed her gently into the small compartment of his hoverbike, strapping her in as best he could, ensuring she would not fall during the ride back. Then, with one final glance at the wreckage, he engaged the throttle, heading home through the gloom. Marcus's shelter was more than a simple hut, though from the outside, one would easily mistake it for a battered shed. Below ground, however, was a labyrinthine system of rooms and corridors he had painstakingly carved out and reinforced with salvaged steel. Here, deep within the planet's rocky crust, was a makeshift medbay that Marcus had equipped with rudimentary healing devices, some of which he had bartered for during rare visits to distant trading posts. He laid the alien woman upon a narrow cot. Hooking her up to a diagnostic scanner, he had rigged together from old military medkits. As he carefully cleaned and bandaged her wounds, he noticed delicate patterns across her arms, subtle markings that glowed softly with an internal luminescence. They pulsed in time with her shallow breaths, as if responding to the rhythm of her life force. For 3 days, she remained unconscious, drifting in and out of feverish delirium. Marcus monitored her vitals as best he could, administering nutrient solutions and adjusting the temperature controls to ensure her comfort. At times, she would mumble in a language he did not recognize, sharp syllables interspersed with a melodic undertone. He recorded the sounds, hoping to find a means to translate them one day, but for now, he could only guess at their meaning. There was a sense of urgency in her voice, as though she called out for something or someone dear to her. On the morning of the 4th day, she stirred. Marcus was in the adjoining workroom, calibrating a leftover laser cutter, when he heard a soft gasp. He rushed to her side, finding her propped on one elbow, her golden eyes wide with alarm, struggling to speak. She recoiled from him at first, her breath ragged, scanning her surroundings in confusion. Only after several tense moments did her posture relax. "Who are you?" she finally managed, her voice trembling yet laced with a quiet strength. "My name is Marcus," he replied gently, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I found you in a crashed escape pod. You were injured. I've been taking care of you." She blinked, as though processing his words. A soft glow danced across the markings on her arms. After a pause, she tried to sit up fully, wincing from the pain. Marcus offered a supporting hand, and she accepted it reluctantly. "Thank you," she said, her gaze flicking around the room, landing on the half-disassembled medkit supplies. "My name is Selene. At least, that's the name I've chosen for now." They exchanged cautious words, each unsure of the other's intentions. Selene was quick to ask where she was, how long she had been unconscious, and if anyone else had survived. Her eyes clouded with sorrow when Marcus confessed he had seen no other survivors. She averted her gaze, as though harboring a deep guilt. Over the following days, trust began to form between them, though it was fragile, as trust often is when born of necessity. Selene revealed she had fled her home world, though she remained vague about the exact reasons. She hinted at dangerous powers that ran through her lineage, and at mercenaries sent to claim a bounty on her head. Marcus, having seen the worst that war could do, did not press her further. Instead, he offered quiet assistance, ensuring she regained her strength and comforting her when nightmares caused her to jolt awake in the dead of night. As Selene's health improved, she explored Marcus's underground sanctuary, ever curious about the technologies he had salvaged. She asked about his past, about the medals he had stashed in a small trunk, and about the outdated photographs depicting him in uniform, standing alongside comrades whose names he no longer dared speak. There was a sorrow in his eyes that mirrored her own, though neither of them put it into words. Sometimes, while Marcus tinkered with an ancient filtration system, Selene would sit nearby, lost in thought. Her fingers would trace patterns on her forearms, causing the glowing sigils to spark faintly. These luminous runes, as she finally confessed, were both a gift and a burden. They indicated her heritage as a scion of a powerful royal dynasty. She was not just a fugitive. She was a princess, sought by those who wished to harness or eliminate her latent abilities. The details, she said, were best left unspoken until she was certain Marcus could be trusted with the full weight of her story. Late one evening, Marcus found her perched atop the shelter's exterior, gazing at the alien moon that hung low in the sky like an opalescent eye. The swirling dust around them danced in the moonlight. He joined her quietly, each of them wrapped in thick cloaks to ward off the chill wind. "Thank you, again," she whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. "I have not known true kindness in a long time." Marcus offered a stiff nod, his stoic nature preventing him from voicing the empathy he felt. In truth, he recognized in her a lost soul, much like he had been when he first set foot on this remote world. Perhaps helping her was a chance for redemption, a way to do some good in a universe that had seen him do too much harm. In time, Selene opened up further about her predicament. She explained how her family's lineage was intertwined with ancient cosmic forces, how their monarchy was built on more than political might, on inherent psychic and elemental abilities. Some called them demigods, others called them demons. Selene, possessing unique gifts even among her kin, had been a focal point of intrigue and fear. When she discovered a plot to use her powers for mass domination, she rebelled. Betrayed by those closest to her, she fled, hoping to elude the mercenaries that her own kin had sent to apprehend her. Marcus listened intently, no trace of doubt in his features. He had fought in enough interstellar conflicts to know that stories of mystical powers, while rare, were not mere fables. Indeed, he could sense the subtle energy emanating from Selene, an almost magnetic presence that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. "But why here?" he asked quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This planet is off every chart I've ever seen. It's a dead end." Selene shrugged, the golden flecks in her eyes reflecting the pale moonlight. "When one is desperate enough, any secluded place will do," she replied. "My pod must have plotted a random jump through hyperspace. I could have ended up in a star's corona or drifting in the void. Instead, I landed here, and I suppose fate smiled upon me by leading me to you." Marcus said nothing, but inwardly he felt a stir of something he hadn't felt in years. It was not mere pity, nor was it simple affection. It was a resonance, as though he and Selene were two exiles sharing an unspoken bond, their destinies inextricably linked. They remained there, side by side, until the chill became unbearable and they retreated inside. A subtle shift began to occur, one that Marcus could sense but did not fully understand. The atmosphere within the subterranean shelter grew, charged with a quiet tension. Selene, who once spoke with measured politeness, now seemed prone to unpredictable bouts of restlessness. She would pace the corridors late at night, her eyes glimmering in the dim light, her breathing shallow. The glowing markings on her arms pulsed more frequently, intensifying whenever Marcus was near. In the midst of conversation, her gaze would linger on him, her pupils dilating, and she would then quickly avert her eyes, as though embarrassed by her own reaction. One day, while Marcus was sorting through storage crates, Selene approached from behind. He turned to find her standing uncomfortably close, her expression conflicted. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. "Is there something wrong?" Marcus asked, carefully setting aside the parts he held in his hands. She lowered her gaze, her voice almost a whisper. I feel different," she confessed. "There is a stirring within me that clouds my thoughts, and it centers around you, Marcus." He swallowed hard, remembering the mention of her dangerous powers, the fact that she was from a lineage that did not conform to human norms. A dozen possibilities flitted through his mind. "Different how?" he prompted gently, keeping his tone calm. Selene hesitated, then reached out to touch his arm. Her skin felt warm, almost feverish. "I come from a species with cyclical mating instincts," she explained, struggling to maintain eye contact. "When we encounter someone who resonates with us, these instincts can become overwhelming. I have been trying to suppress them, but it's difficult. My body is reacting, despite my own attempts at denial." Marcus felt a rush of heat creep into his cheeks. He had encountered many alien species in his time, each with its own biology, customs, and rituals, but never had he found himself in such an intimate predicament. He took a step back, half from surprise, half from caution. "I understand," he said haltingly, though he wasn't certain he did. Selene's eyes were full of conflict. "I do not wish to make you uncomfortable," she continued, voice trembling. "But these impulses are growing stronger by the day. I fear it might jeopardize the fragile balance we've achieved, and yet, I don't want to lie about what I'm going through. I owe you honesty for all you've done for me." Marcus studied her face, sensing the vulnerability in her words. A protective instinct welled up inside him, mingling with a strange, unbidden desire. Despite himself, he reached out and gently took her hand. "We'll figure this out," he promised. "I'm not going to abandon you. If this is part of who you are, then we'll handle it together, carefully." Relief flickered in her golden eyes, and though a faint smile curved her lips, Marcus could tell that this new development would complicate matters. He recalled the nightmares she still experienced, her past that remained shrouded in fear, and the uncertain future that awaited her. And now, the primal call of her instincts added yet another layer to the unspoken connection forming between them. Over the next weeks, their routines took on a new tension. Selene avoided close quarters with Marcus unless necessary, trying to restrain her body's signals. She exercised in the subterranean corridors, channeling her restless energy into combat drills. Sometimes, Marcus would catch her mid-practice, twisting in graceful arcs, her hands aglow with greenish light as she summoned glimpses of her hidden power. It was mesmerizing to watch, though he kept his distance, unsure of how much of that energy might be directed by her rising instincts. At night, sleep became elusive. Marcus found himself replaying moments of the day in his mind, her closeness, her scent, the flicker in her eyes, until frustration and longing warred in his chest. He tried to bury himself in tasks, repairing broken panels or sorting through old supply crates, but could not escape the realization that he was becoming deeply entwined with Selene, not just as her rescuer or protector, but as something more personal. Life continued in this uneasy rhythm until one late afternoon, when a distant rumbling shattered the relative peace. Marcus had ventured beyond the shelter's perimeter to gather water samples from a small crater lake that glowed faintly under the red sun. As he refilled his container, he felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. He looked up to see black shapes in the sky, moving swiftly, leaving contrails of thick smoke in their wake. A sense of dread gripped him. Only ships powered by advanced propulsion could brave the thick atmosphere of this planet without risking a crash. And these ships, from the silhouettes he could discern, appeared to be mercenary crafts, sleek, predatory vessels carrying sophisticated scanners, built to track fugitives across hostile terrains. Marcus's heart pounded. Selene's pursuers had found them. He hurried back to the shelter, dust kicking up around his feet as he sprinted across the rocky terrain. By the time he arrived, Selene was already at the subterranean entrance, her eyes wide, panic evident in her expression. She had sensed the approach of her hunters, perhaps through her latent abilities, or perhaps the vibrations in the air had been enough to alert her. "We have to hide," she said breathlessly, the glow on her arms fluctuating wildly. "They'll kill anyone who stands in their way. That includes you." Marcus ushered her inside, sealing the entryway and activating the camouflage shield he had painstakingly installed around the perimeter. It wouldn't last forever, but it might buy them time. Together, they retreated into the deeper levels of the shelter, waiting for the scanning beams that would undoubtedly sweep over the area. Sure enough, a low-frequency hum soon reverberated through the metal walls. Marcus guided Selene to a hidden chamber lined with lead analog plating, used to shield sensitive equipment from radiation. He whispered for her to remain quiet, resisting the urge to hold her trembling form. The pulsing of the scanning beams passed overhead, a sickly red light flickering through the corridor cracks. After several excruciating minutes, the hum dissipated. Marcus risked venturing to the upper level, checking sensor feeds. The mercenary ships had landed some distance away, evidently not pinpointing the shelter's location but close enough to pose an immediate threat. The readings indicated squads of armed troopers dispersing across the desert, likely combing the terrain for any sign of Selene's presence. "We can't stay here," Marcus murmured, returning to where Selene crouched. "They'll tear the place apart if they catch even the faintest reading of your energy signature. We have to get off this planet, or at least move somewhere safer." Her eyes glistened with worry. "Where can we go?" "They'll track me across the galaxy." Marcus set his jaw, thinking quickly. He had a small, barely functional spacecraft hidden in a cavern some miles away. It was nothing compared to a mercenary warship, but if they managed a stealthy escape, they might slip through the planet's atmosphere and jump to a safer sector. "We'll head for the cave," he decided. "I have an old vessel there, used it once to come here from a derelict station. It's not in prime condition, but it might just work." Selene looked as though she wanted to object, but then her eyes hardened with resolve. "Let's go," she said. Under the fading light of the planet's sun, Marcus and Selene set out on foot, moving carefully between ravines and rock outcroppings. Marcus carried a compact rifle slung across his back, while Selene clutched a small satchel containing rations and the few precious keepsakes she had retained from her old life. A ring bearing her family's crest and a data crystal she guarded with unwavering vigilance. Whenever they heard the distant drone of mercenary patrols overhead, they pressed against the ground, hearts pounding, until the sound receded. As night fell, the temperature plummeted, but they made steady progress. Selene's light step belied her inner turmoil, and Marcus could sense her tension. The primal instincts she struggled to contain seemed magnified by the danger they now faced, and more than once she brushed too close to him, her breath warm against his neck, as though seeking comfort. Each time, Marcus felt a current pass between them, a pull that both enticed and frightened him. They reached the cavern's entrance just before midnight. The mouth of the cave yawned open, shrouded in darkness. With a handheld lantern, Marcus led Selene through winding passages, past stalactites dripping mineral-rich water. At last, they arrived at the hidden hangar, a wide chamber where an old starship, battered but intact, rested on a makeshift landing pad. Its hull was marred by rust and scorch marks, and several external panels had been removed for repairs that Marcus had never quite finished. "We might have to do some quick fixes," Marcus admitted, though he was already moving to inspect the ship's systems. "There's enough fuel for a single jump, maybe two if we're lucky. We just need to get beyond their radar net." Selene set down her pack, glancing around at the dusty, claustrophobic chamber. "This is safer than the shelter?" He offered a grim smile. "Nothing is safe, but at least we're mobile." She nodded, and together they worked through the night, installing fresh power cells, sealing hull breaches, and calibrating the warp drive with limited tools and parts. Their hands grew grimy with lubricant, and their muscles ached from strenuous labor, but neither complained. The knowledge that mercenaries could discover them at any moment spurred them on. Just before dawn, the ship roared to life, engines sputtering at first, then settling into a steady purr. Marcus could have wept with relief. He ushered Selene into the cockpit, strapping her into the co-pilot's seat, then took the pilot's chair himself. With a few final keystrokes, the navigation console lit up, displaying a star map with possible jump coordinates. Marcus chose one at random, a seldom-traveled corridor that might provide cover. "Hang on," he warned, gripping the controls. The ship's thrusters fired, kicking up clouds of dust as they ascended. Stone chunks rained down, and Selene gasped, clinging to the seat. Marcus navigated through the twisting tunnels, scraping the hull once or twice against jagged rock walls, until they burst into the open night sky. For a few seconds, they soared unchallenged under the glittering constellations. Then, just as Marcus prepared to engage the warp drive, alarms blared. Two mercenary vessels had locked onto them, appearing on the radar in swift pursuit. Their advanced engines quickly closed the distance. "Brace yourself," Marcus shouted, jerking the controls to evade a burst of laser fire. Selene gasped as the ship shook violently, sparks showering them from an overloaded conduit. She forced her trembling hands to move over the co-pilot's console, bringing auxiliary shields online. The protective barrier flickered around them, absorbing a second barrage. Marcus pushed the engines to their limits, weaving between jagged mountain peaks that pierced the gloom. The mercenary vessels, sleek and deadly, matched his every move. A missile streaked past them, detonating in a flash of light that illuminated the desert below. Selene closed her eyes, summoning the focus to channel her latent abilities, but fear and exhaustion hindered her attempts. She felt the runes on her arms grow hot, the raw power stirring just beyond her grasp. Another jolt rocked the ship as a glancing shot struck them, sending them spiraling momentarily. "We're not going to make it," Marcus growled, his knuckles white on the throttle. With a surge of desperation, Selene tapped into her energy. Her vision swam with brilliant colors, her mind buzzing with an otherworldly hum. She extended her right hand toward the nearest mercenary craft through the cockpit's viewport. The symbols on her skin flared with dazzling radiance, and for an instant, a ripple of greenish light shot outward. The air crackled with static. Then, in a burst, the mercenary vessel's engines sputtered and died. Smoke trailed from its hull as it careened into a mountainside, exploding in a fiery bloom. "You did it," Marcus exclaimed, heart pounding. But there was no time to celebrate. The second vessel drew near, its cannons charging for a deadly barrage. Marcus clenched his jaw, redirecting power to the warp drive. "Hold on," he yelled, slamming the control panel. A thunderous roar filled the cockpit as space tore open before them. Starlight stretched into neon streaks, and the planet below vanished in a swirl of cosmic distortion. They had made the jump, escaping the final wave of enemy fire by a mere heartbeat. When the turbulence subsided, the view screen showed only the shimmering fabric of hyperspace, a corridor of swirling light that carried them far from danger, at least for now. Selene slumped in her seat, her breathing ragged, the glow on her arms subsiding slowly. Marcus reached over and gently touched her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open, exhaustion plain on her face, but a trembling smile curved her lips. "We made it," he said softly, though the tension in his chest refused to fully ease. He knew better than to relax. The mercenaries were resourceful, and he suspected their infiltration ran deeper than a mere handful of hired guns. Selene nodded, but worry lingered in her gaze. "We can't run forever, Marcus. Sooner or later, we have to confront what I truly am, and those who want me dead." The battered ship emerged from hyperspace near an unassuming refueling station orbiting a small green moon. Marcus knew this outpost from his military days. It was a neutral zone, governed by a loose coalition that disapproved of private vendettas and mercenary conflicts. Traders, vagabonds, and travelers of all species mingled in the corridors, exchanging goods, services, and information under the watchful eyes of station enforcers. They docked in a dingy berth at the station's lower levels, where the overhead lights flickered ominously. Selene hid her features beneath a hooded cloak, wary of curious gazes. Marcus led her through the narrow corridors, seeking the less reputable mechanics who might overlook official paperwork in exchange for credits or trade. Their goal was to repair the hull damage and upgrade the warp drive to better evade pursuers. As they navigated the crowds, Selene felt overwhelmed by the swirl of alien scents and the clamor of voices speaking in dozens of languages. Marcus's presence was her only anchor. She clung to the crook of his arm, ignoring the stares from passing onlookers. Eventually, they found an old friend of Marcus, a grizzled Martian named Rogan, tinkering in a workshop cluttered with half-dismantled starship parts. After a round of negotiations, spiced with currency, war stories, and hush money, Rogan agreed to handle the repairs. While he worked, Marcus and Selene roamed the station, searching for supplies and, more importantly, for any lead-on who was after Selene and how close they might be. They ended up in a dimly lit cantina, where the smell of spiced grog and fried alien fungi hung thick in the air. Over a corner table, they whispered about their next steps. "We need to learn what's happening back on your home world," Marcus pointed out. "If this is political, maybe there's a way to clear your name." Selene's eyes were troubled. "I'm not sure I want to go back. I left for a reason, Marcus. My family." She trailed off, fighting back emotion. "They wanted to use me, to harness the destructive potential that courses through my veins. I saw what they did to those who opposed them. I can't face that again." He placed a comforting hand over hers. "I understand, but we can't keep running blind. We need information." So, they made discreet inquiries among smugglers and traders. Most claimed ignorance or demanded outrageous sums for mere rumors. However, a scruffy Bothian data broker offered them a lead in exchange for the data crystal Selene carried. She refused to part with it permanently, suspecting it held vital secrets about her heritage, but they bargained for partial access. After a nerve-wracking wait, the broker returned with news that sent chills down their spines. "They call her the Emerald Scion," the broker muttered, reading from a flickering datapad. "Huge bounty, posted by a high-ranking figure in the royal family. There's chatter about her powers growing unstable, a threat to the entire monarchy if she returns. Also talk of covert labs, genetic experiments. Something big's brewing." Selene's hands tightened on the edges of her cloak, her breathing uneven. Marcus exchanged a somber glance with her, knowing the gravity of this. The nightmares she suffered were more than just flashbacks. They were warnings of a monstrous ambition that her bloodline sought to manifest. Rogan finished repairing their ship, upgrading the warp drive to a more modern unit that could handle multiple jumps. The day before they were set to depart, a broadcast flickered across the station's public screens. An official from Selene's home world delivered a statement about a fugitive princess whose mental instability posed a grave danger. They offered leniency to anyone who would turn her over. The images included a blurred rendering of Selene's face, enough to raise suspicion but not enough for conclusive identification. The broadcast ended, replaced by garish advertisements for luxury cruises. A hush settled over the cantina. Selene kept her hood low, heart pounding. Marcus, sensing the mounting risk, led her back to their berth. That night, in the cramped quarters of their newly repaired starship, they sat in silence, each lost in anxious thought. Selene stared at the ring bearing her family crest, turning it in her hands. "I once believed I could change them from within," she murmured, tears brimming in her golden eyes. "But they corrupted everything good. My father, my mother, even my siblings. None could resist the allure of harnessing cosmic powers they barely understood. They twisted our gifts for war, for subjugation. I was the only one who resisted. Now they want me dead." Marcus reached for her hand, pressing it between his own. "You did the right thing by running," he said softly. "But you can't run forever." She met his gaze, voice trembling. "What do I do, Marcus? I can't let them win. But I'm afraid of what might happen if I confront them directly. My powers, they grow stronger each time I'm forced to use them. What if I can't control them anymore?" He exhaled a long, weary sigh. "I've fought against overwhelming odds, Selene. In war, you never truly know if you can keep your soul intact. But sometimes, you have to face what hunts you, or it'll tear everything you care about apart. You've got a friend in me. Let's figure this out, together." A shiver ran through her at his words, partly from fear, partly from undeniable attraction. The tension between them, born of her instincts and deepened by their emotional bond, hung thick in the air. Marcus gently pulled her closer. The moment their lips met, a charge of energy coursed through them, igniting long-suppressed desires. The runes on Selene's arms flared, bathing the cramped cabin in a soft green glow. Yet this moment of passion carried a bittersweet edge. They both knew that dawn would bring new perils, and the path before them would be fraught with conflict and uncertainty. Still, in the stolen warmth of that kiss, they found hope, for themselves, and for whatever future they might carve out of the galaxy's darkness. The next day, Marcus and Selene departed the station. They charted a course that would take them near her home world, if only to glean information about her family's machinations. It was a perilous decision, like stepping into the jaws of the beast. But if the monarchy truly had designs that threatened countless lives, neither Marcus nor Selene could stand by idly. Their journey took them through uncharted nebulae, past the wreckage of forgotten battles, and along the fringes of black holes that glimmered with terrible majesty. Along the way, they sparred in the cargo hold, honing Selene's control over her powers. She learned to harness bursts of energy, forming protective barriers or launching crackling offensives of green lightning. Marcus, experienced in close-quarters combat, taught her discipline and strategy, even as he marveled at the raw potential she wielded. Their bond deepened with each warp jump. The initial awkwardness of her mating instincts transformed into a fierce, if tender, affection. In the hush of the ship's nights, they shared their histories. Marcus told tales of lost comrades and unhealed scars, while Selene recounted her once joyful childhood, long before the palace corridors turned cold with ambition and deceit. In each other, they discovered a comfort that transcended their differences, forging a connection stronger than mere circumstance. At last, star maps showed they were nearing the outskirts of her home system. Selene's shoulders tensed when she saw the swirling gas giant that loomed beyond her planet. Marcus was at her side, offering quiet reassurances. "Are you ready?" he asked, checking the sensors for any sign of hostile patrols. She swallowed. "I have to be." They planned to land on a sparsely populated moon orbiting her home world, gather intelligence, and possibly make contact with any loyalist factions that opposed her family's tyranny. If fortune favored them, they would find allies. If not, they would stand alone. The moon was a stark, rocky sphere. Its surface lay riddled with craters, thin wisps of atmosphere, giving it a perpetual twilight, painting the horizon in silver and blue. Marcus guided the ship to a dusty landing near an abandoned mining settlement. Its collapsed structures, rusted and twisted by centuries of neglect, stood as silent sentinels of failure. Debris littered the ground, a grim reminder of how the monarchy had once milked the moon's resources and then cast it aside. Donned in environment suits, Marcus and Selene ventured into the settlement's remains, searching for any sign of recent activity. Their footsteps crunched on the barren ground. Eventually, they discovered a hidden bunker, its reinforced door sealed by a passcode. Selene felt energy radiating from within, like an echo left behind by those who had once sheltered here. With a deft gesture, she directed her power at the lock. Sparks flew, and the door hissed open. Inside, they found evidence of rebel forces, crates of contraband weapons, data terminals stuffed with encrypted files, and tattered banners bearing symbols of resistance. Dust-covered skeletons in body armor told a tragic tale. These had been souls who fought back against the monarchy, only to be crushed. Selene knelt beside one such figure, gently touching a faded insignia. While Marcus inspected data terminals, Selene wandered deeper into the bunker, compelled by a strange pull. She entered a secluded chamber lined with carvings, ancient runes resembling those on her own arms. In the center rested a large, glowing crystal, its surface rippling with shifting patterns of light. She approached, heart pounding. A sudden resonance surged within her, as though the crystal recognized her presence. When her fingers grazed it, visions flooded her mind. Images of the royal palace, a cosmic storm, and a throne room lit by flickering torches. She saw her father's cold eyes, felt her mother's ruthless counsel, witnessed siblings who regarded her as little more than a tool for their ambitions. She saw entire star systems cowering in fear, the monarchy's armies sweeping across them. At the center of it all lay a hidden prophecy, one that foretold the rise of a being with power enough to unite the cosmos or plunge it into unending darkness. The being was called the Emerald Scion, a child of regal blood whose might would eclipse all who came before. A sob escaped Selene's lips as she tore her hand back from the crystal. She nearly collapsed under the weight of revelation. This was why they wanted her, why they feared her. She was the key to either consolidating their dominion or overturning it entirely. Marcus rushed in, alarmed by the spike in energy. He caught Selene before she fell, helping her steady herself. She clung to him, trembling, her cheeks wet with tears. "They can't be allowed to succeed," she whispered. "They will enslave entire galaxies, using me as their cornerstone." Marcus's arms tightened around her. "Then we fight," he said simply, though his heart quavered with the enormity of the task. "We'll find allies. We'll rally those who resist. We'll bring them down." Emboldened by the bunker's revelations, they carried the data crystals, hoping to prove the monarchy's atrocities to any who might join their cause. They set off for neighboring systems, rumored to harbor exiled generals or fledgling rebel factions. The routes were fraught with danger, pirates, rogue warlords, and more mercenaries lying in wait, but Marcus and Selene pressed on. Their efforts led to tense negotiations, secret meetings in asteroid hideouts, and hushed conferences with dissidents bearing scars of war. Some recognized Selene at once, drawn to the mystic runes on her skin. Others were skeptical, unwilling to trust another royal. But the data she carried, plus her impassioned pleas, gradually convinced them. Small pockets of resistance united, forging alliances under a single banner. Word spread that the lost princess had returned, determined not to seize the throne, but to destroy the tyranny of her own bloodline. Meanwhile, the monarchy tightened its net, dispatching assassins and spies. Several times, Marcus and Selene barely escaped ambush. Each scrape tested their resolve. Strangely, the constant danger only brought them closer. In the stolen pauses between missions, they clung to each other. Selene's mating instincts had evolved into genuine love, no longer a mere biological drive. For Marcus, haunted by war, she became a beacon of redemption. Eventually, they amassed a ragtag fleet. It included small vessels from sympathetic smugglers, heavily modified freighters from rebel enclaves, and a few battleships commandeered by mutinous crews. Though outnumbered, the rebels possessed fierce resolve, bolstered by Selene's presence. Her power had grown. She could disrupt enemy shields, disable advanced weapons, and shield entire ships from devastating blasts, if only for brief moments. Yet Selene wrestled with doubt. "What if I lose control in the heat of battle?" she confided one evening, as they stood on the bridge of their flagship. "What if I unleash something worse than my family ever could?" Marcus cupped her face in his hands, meeting her troubled gaze. "I won't let that happen," he vowed, his voice gentle but resolute. "Whatever it takes, we'll face it together." The final confrontation came beneath the looming shadow of her home world. The monarchy had amassed a ring of battleships, each bristling with advanced weaponry capable of leveling cities. The rebel fleet emerged from hyperspace in dozens of warp flashes, their formations spread wide to minimize casualties from the enemy's opening salvos. Marcus stood on the bridge beside Selene, clad in a patchwork uniform that bore the insignia of a field commander. She wore a specialized battle suit, designed to channel her abilities, its fabric woven with filaments that pulsed green at her wrists. The monarchy's ships fired first, unleashing waves of plasma that lit up the void. The rebels returned fire, weaving a tapestry of beams, missiles, and flares across the darkness. Selene's part was crucial. From the flagship's command center, she projected psychic interference, disrupting the monarchy's targeting systems. With a concentrated burst, she disabled the smaller vessels closest to them, leaving them adrift. Meanwhile, the monarchy deployed its elite guard, hardened mercenaries, genetically enhanced soldiers. They boarded rebel craft, igniting bloody skirmishes in cramped corridors. Marcus coordinated from the bridge, issuing orders through the comm, while squads of rebels and defectors battled hand-to-hand. Blaster fire scorched walls, the air thick with smoke and sparks. Though outgunned, the rebels fought with tenacity fueled by the dream of a liberated galaxy. At the heart of the royal blockade lay its largest dreadnought, a colossal warship rumored to carry the monarchy's patriarch, Selene's father. It bristled with siege cannons and labyrinthine defenses. Over the open comm channels, his voice crackled with paternal contempt. "Emerald Scion, your defiance ends here. Surrender, and you may yet see mercy." Selene's golden eyes narrowed, tears welling with the bitter memory of betrayal. "Father," she whispered, before turning to Marcus. With a determined nod, she ordered the flagship's warp thrusters to surge ahead, driving them straight into the dreadnought's path. Amid heavy fire, Marcus, Selene, and a small strike team breached the dreadnought's hull. Charges blew apart sealed corridors, allowing them entry. They fought through waves of royal guards, Selene using her powers to short-circuit blast doors or send arcs of green lightning at entrenched positions. Marcus led the ground tactics, clearing corners with precise bursts from his plasma rifle. Finally, they reached the throne room, a cavernous hall lined with towering columns and ornate tapestries recounting the monarchy's storied history. At the far end stood Selene's father, draped in regal robes, eyes ablaze with hatred. Flanking him were her siblings, each marked with the same runes as Selene. They regarded her with cold disdain. A tense hush fell. Selene and her father locked gazes. She recalled how he once held her hand as a child, guiding her along palace corridors, before cruelty and ambition eclipsed all warmth. Steeling herself, she stepped forward, voice echoing through the hall. "This ends now," she declared, her green-tinged aura flaring around her. He answered with a sneer, gesturing for his children to attack. They unleashed arcs of sizzling energy, clashing with Selene's shield. Marcus ducked behind a column, returning fire at any guard who joined the fray. The siblings pressed in, their combined blasts threatening to shatter Selene's defenses. She drew deeper on her power, the runes on her arms flaring white-hot. The floor quaked, pillars cracked, and dust rained from the high ceilings. Her father activated a hidden device on the dais, amplifying the siblings' abilities with the monarchy's ancient technology. Their energy surged, forcing Selene to her knees. "That is enough," Marcus roared, firing an explosive round at the device. It shattered in a spray of sparks, the amplification field flickering out. The siblings staggered, their sudden power boost gone. Selene mustered her remaining strength, flinging a wave of force that sent them crashing against the walls. She advanced on her father. "You would destroy worlds to keep your throne," she said, tears blazing in her eyes. "I won't let you." His expression contorted with rage. He summoned every last reserve of cosmic might, swirling it into a raging vortex. Selene met his vortex with a beam of her own, green light colliding with raw darkness. The impact was deafening, the shockwave sending columns toppling. For one endless moment, they stood locked in that blinding struggle. With a final surge, Selene's beam cut through his defense, extinguishing the vortex. Her father let out an agonized cry as his connection to the runes was severed. He collapsed, the glow gone from his eyes. The siblings, battered and cowed, lay among the wreckage, unable to muster further resistance. In the silence that followed, Marcus rushed to Selene, helping her stand. She trembled with exhaustion, tears streaking her cheeks. Yet in that moment, she realized she had done more than topple a throne. She had broken a cycle of ruthless ambition, freeing countless lives from tyranny. Word of the monarchy's fall spread swiftly, carried by every rebel vessel and broadcast to every colony. Rebellions erupted across the empire, toppling regional governors and forging new freedoms. Selene, though heir to the throne, had no intention of perpetuating its oppression. She set about dismantling the monarchy's mechanisms of control, forging alliances with newly liberated systems. Marcus, at her side, lent his combat experience to stabilize the transition, ensuring that warlords did not seize power in the monarchy's wake. In place of the old empire, a grand council formed, representing the diversity of countless star systems. Selene served as a guiding presence, her powers devoted to rebuilding rather than conquering. Marcus often found himself gazing at her during council meetings, wondering how they had come so far from that dusty planet where he had first discovered her injured and afraid. Years passed in relative peace. Trade routes flourished, and knowledge flowed freely between formerly isolated worlds. With Selene's help, centuries of enmity gave way to mutual understanding. She and Marcus settled into a regal estate, a repurposed palace that no longer symbolized fear, but rather unity and progress. Over time, they started a family, raising 2 children whose mixed heritage held the promise of hope for many worlds. Their son, Orion, inherited Marcus's quiet resilience and his mother's emerald eyes. Their daughter, Astra, displayed early signs of the same runic markings that adorned Selene, though the full extent of her abilities remained to be seen. The children grew up in an atmosphere of acceptance and goodwill, a testament to the change their parents had championed. For Marcus, fatherhood was a redemption he had never thought possible. For Selene, motherhood expanded her vow to protect. They nurtured their children with the same compassion that had united them in the first place. Even as distant rumors spoke of a new cosmic threat stirring along the outer rim, their life together shone with a happiness they could not have imagined in the dark days of secrecy and flight. Though they knew the galaxy could be harsh and the future uncertain, Marcus and Selene chose to bask in the peace they had won, raising their family and guiding the new Federation. Their improbable union had reshaped the very fabric of the cosmos, proving that even the fiercest instincts could be tempered by love, and that the mightiest rulers could be humbled by compassion. And, in that luminous moment of respite, they dared to believe that their story had reached a joyful chapter, one earned by courage, sacrifice, and faith in one another. Far above their estate, countless stars stretched into the distance, each shining with the promise of infinite tomorrows, each a silent witness to how a single act of kindness, offered by a weary ex-soldier on a forsaken planet, could alter the destiny of an entire galaxy.